Welcome, everyone, to another Living Room Lecture Series with historic Locust Grove. We are so pleased that you are with us today. My name is Hannah Zimmerman, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Director at Historic Locust Grove. And I'm so excited to have today's speaker, Jessica Stavros, speak with us on the Hill Sisters of Louisville. This program is sponsored by John and Jeannie Bezo, so we're very grateful to them for that. And of course, we're grateful to all of you for your donations and for attending this lecture. We're just so pleased that we're able to gather in this virtual space, even though we are not able to all be together. And now, without further ado, I'm going to shoot this over to our Executive Director at Locust Grove, Carol Ely. Carol, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. Well, as you can see by looking at my background, this is a real background. I am in my office. So progress is being made, and later today we're actually having an inspection from the Board of Health to see if they will give us permission to open. So we have been busily finding ways to do that safely. And if all goes well, we will announce the dates when we will be open on a limited basis for tours. But it's become clear to all of us on the staff that we are going to need to continue to do things virtually. So watch for a kind of a two-track programming schedule from us that includes both online experiences, some may be pre-recorded, some may be live like this Zoom, and also some in-person experiences on the site, which will probably be a little bit different than anything you've ever experienced before. But we will be here one way or another, and we're so glad you're here, and we're so glad that we've had such generous and available speakers for this series. Thank you, Jessica. So you don't want to hear any more from me, I'm sure. Let's move on to the exciting lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. Everyone, just a quick reminder, you can leave on your video camera. We want to see your faces, so please be sure to leave that on if that's what you choose. If you're eating lunch, you can leave it off. But we want you to leave your microphones off. It distorts the audio if you have too many microphones on at once. And you'll leave any questions that you have in the chat. So just make sure if you have questions, you can leave them in the chat. And I'm going to turn it over quickly to Brian Cushing, the program director at Locust Grove, who has come up with a birthday cocktail of sorts for today's program, or just a cocktail that he enjoys. Brian, take it away.
Thank you, Hannah, and welcome, Jessica. My name is Brian Cushing. I am the program director at Locust Grove, and we are going to stick with the theme of the lecture today, and we are going to get a taste jumping to 1893. The last family to own Locust Grove before it became a museum, the Waters family, had owned the place for 10 years by that point in 1893, and this is from a book called Drinks and Sandwiches for Your Husband's Friends by One Who Knows. And had I planned ahead any further, I would have made you a sandwich too. This is called a Kentucky Toddy, and it's a really interesting look at how terms evolve over time, because right below the Kentucky Toddy was the mint julep, whereas this is nearly identical to what the mint julep came from almost a century before. So this is kind of like a proto mint julep, but they weren't, but it moved beyond being called that. So it's a very easy one. The first thing we want to do is you want to take a lump of sugar. Okay, so there's a little sugar cube, and dissolve it in as little water as possible. And so I actually started that beforehand. So we have a sugar cube dissolved in water. Sugar will dissolve better in room temperature water than in cold water. And so the next thing we're going to do is take a few mint leaves off the stalks, drop those in there, and we're going to mash those a little bit with the muddler. If you don't have a muddler, anything you can do will work. You want to keep this kind of going until your sugar water starts to turn green. All right. The next part is we are going to put in our bourbon. It does specifically call for bourbon. And this is one where you don't want to really skimp. You don't want to use like something you don't really like, because this is going to be very spirit forward at first. So pick a bourbon you like for this one. Today I'm using Waltham's Kentucky Bourbon single barrel. very good stuff. Before we can find it, there is about 2 ounces left in this bottle. You want to stick between 1.5 ounces and 2 ounces. And a little note on that, during the Victorian period, 2 ounces was also referred to as a wine glass. We think of wine glasses as quite a bit bigger, but this is a Victorian wine glass. It measures in right at 2 ounces. So we're going to put that over our sugar and mint, stir it up. And if you can let this sit, the alcohol will draw the oils out of the mint. And that's actually where the term mint julep came from. Almost 100 years before. Julep, for centuries, had been a word that referred to a medicinal concoction where you would use alcohol to draw out the essence of different medicinal plants. And so the joke here was this was actually a drink called a sling, but they called it a julep because they were going through the same process, and eventually the name just stuck. So if you could leave that steep for a while, that's great. If not, put a couple ice cubes in it, stir it up, and the longer you sip on it, the more that mint will extract and mintier it will get. Good idea to use a straw. And maybe your next happy hour, you can join me in a Kentucky toddy. Thanks again, and back to Hannah.
Thank you, Brian. We're so looking forward to drinking that today. Without further ado, we've heard from Carol, we've heard from Brian, and after a brief introduction, Jessica Stavros, get ready. You are going to hear from her. So, Jessica Stavros has been a museum professional since 2004. After receiving a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Louisville and a master's degree in business communication from Spalding University, both of which were fully funded by the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation in Washington, D.C. Her passion lies in 19th century Ohio Valley history, and this focus brought her to work within historic house and community museums such as Farmington Historic Plantation and the Portland Museum. For the past 8 years, she was the Southeast Regional Director for the Indiana State Museum Historic Sites, managing historic sites in southern Indiana, the Culbertson Mansion in New Albany, Corden Capitol in Corden, and Lanier Mansion in Madison. But her recent promotion brought her back to the land of Kentucky, where she serves as the new Deputy Director of the Kentucky Historical Society. Jessica is also on several nonprofit boards and committees, including Louisville Public Media's Community Advisory Board and Happy Birthday Park, and recognitions include Business First's 20 People to Know in Tourism and Hospitality and New Albany's Hometown Hero Award. Today, she is here to talk about the Hill Sisters, 2 Louisville teachers known for their happy birthday song. However, Jessica believes that the song is an unexpected byproduct of a much larger contribution to the larger national narrative, and that a series of cultural shifts in 19th century Louisville nurtured a group of progressive ideals that truly changed the world. Jessica, take it away.
That was a very warm welcome. Thank you very much. I just want to make sure I see my screen sharing is paused, but I want to make sure to share my screen because as I talk out loud, I have pictures to show you. So I want to make sure I do this right. Can everyone see that?
Yep, great.
Full screen. Okay, great. This is fun. Well, I do want to start by saying thank you so much to Locust Grove and the folks that made this happen. This is really fun, and it's so awesome to see so many familiar faces. So I miss you guys. Also, before I get into it, I'll say I'm here as the Deputy Director of the Kentucky Historical Society, but most of this research has been done in my role as historian for the Happy Birthday Park and my time at the Culbertson Mansion, part of the Indiana State Museum system in New Albany. So you will hear kind of an amalgamation between Happy Birthday Park, which is a nonprofit organization. We are dedicated to building a public park in the city of Louisville for the Hill Sisters and their legacy in childhood education and music. But you'll also hear about Culbertsons in Southern Indiana and a lot about Kentucky history. So it's a little interdisciplinary in that mode. And I also have to give a real shout out to Happy Birthday Park. They brought me on because I was a female historian and they wanted to focus on women in the field who were pushing this research forward in Kentucky. So I wouldn't have known much about any of this had it not been for those initiatives. So I represent all of us. Okay, so I will start. I also want to say to keep in mind, I am a very casual person. So I want to make sure that you guys ask questions in the chat when you can. And when you ask them, I want to be able to answer them in real time with what we're talking about. So please feel free to ask those questions. Okay. Also, I've never done a Zoom lecture before. So if my eyes go over here, I'm looking at my notes because I want to stay focused. Okay. So when I start by telling the story, my interpretation of the story of Mildred and Patty Hill, also known as the Hill sisters, they are mostly known for their happy birthday song. Some would call it the most famous song in the world. Known mostly for their song, though, Patty and Mildred and their remarkable accomplishments have really been largely kind of forgotten, especially in their own hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. So in doing this research, we realized that their work really serves as a testament to the city of Louisville and their dedication to social betterment initiatives. And the sisters are really a product of their environment. And much like we do today, they lived during a time of extreme change. And there were, before they were even born, there were these cultural shifts that were happening in Louisville specifically, in the Ohio Valley region, that set the stage. And these major shifts helped usher in the future of the Hill family. So this is not a story necessarily about the Hill sisters. It's really a story about Louisville and this perfect storm of dynamic cultural shifts that manifested in a pair of sisters who were destined really to change the world. So in the slide here that you see, you will see the two sisters, that is Mildred on the left with their hair kind of piled up, and her sister Patty on the right. Mildred Jane Hill, Patty Smith Hill. So when we talk about antebellum Louisville, we're really, one of the first shifts that we want to talk about, and this slide is a kind of a snapshot of downtown Louisville at 1850s. I believe the time is on this. The first shift that we talk about is the Presbyterian movement here. Thanks to the invention of the steamboat in 1811, Presbyterians in large numbers from Pennsylvania of Scotch-Irish descent, they traveled south and maintained a large presence in the Ohio Valley. That presence was mostly felt through mission work and benevolent societies, what we would think of as almost like philanthropy. Particularly their work focused on children, the poor, immigrants, and people of color. Presbyterians also tended to place a great value on education. And there were many prominent local Presbyterians who were connected to a system of education in Kentucky, seen with church elders in this area, namely Reverend Stuart Robinson was one, and Gideon Blackburn, both who were presidents of Center College in Danville, Kentucky. They settled in Louisville, and they had a major impact on the city for the years to come. But by the 1840s, we see a split in the Presbyterian Church. It's kind of like an old school versus new school. The new school kind of relaxed the old school's Calvinist doctrine, think like Footloose a little bit, like no dancing. So they kind of relaxed on things like that, but mostly it was about the opposition of slavery. Now, the Culbertson family in New Albany fits this description of a Presbyterian family to a T, and they were part of this split, and they chose the more progressive, humanistic viewpoint to practicing their faith. The next shift we see is the changing role of women. In early 19th century life, whether one was rich or poor, women still worked physically very hard. Their value was in competence and resourcefulness. But within 20 years, within one generation, especially among the elite, women became a little more sheltered as they devoted their lives to more social rounds and what we call advantageous marriages. In mercantile Louisville, among the merchants in the city, wives of merchants led pampered lives, considering their counterparts with less funds. They had handfuls of domestic servants, and their job, the women's job, was to furnish their homes, to make social calls, really to manage their household. So by making women decorative, it shows their wealth and their class and their success. So then their value becomes, their value is in their reticence and their submissiveness. And these are the expectations that a female born into a family of means this is what it is expected of her. It was kind of considered at a point to be shameful for a woman to work. Now, when I say women, I mean Native American-born white women. Most female immigrants took up work, especially in mills or factories. Women of color, of course, took up work if they were, this is of course before the Civil War, if they were not enslaved. So white, wealthy women were completely dependent on the men in their lives. They would eat based on the help of their husbands, fathers, brothers, their sons, for everything. For their homes, their land, their food, their clothing, every aspect of their life. I love this picture. These are our buddies with the big barrels. Another dynamic shift was, of course, the immigration movement that happened. There was a major influx of immigration in the years right before the Civil War. So in 1830, Louisville had a population of about 10,000 people, with about 5% of that as foreign-born. By 1860, our population was 70,000 people, with 40% of them foreign-born, mostly German and Irish immigrants. Louisville at that time was the 10th largest city in the United States. We had a wholesale trade, and these are 1860s dollars. Our wholesale trade at the time was about $20 million. We had merchants, factories, taverns, hotels, theaters, newspapers. I think there were over 200 taverns at this time. So what we know is that, especially as this river town, Louisville had culture, and it had all sorts of a mix of everybody that was kind of all mixed in together, and of course, drinking. And then we add to that, to the immigration influx, we add to that the Bloody Monday riots of 1855. And there was an undeniable cultural explosion happening in this large urban city. So all of these movements are kind of setting the stage, and the girls are born into this time. Later in life, someone interviewed Patti Smith Hill and asked her about how she accomplished all that she had done. And her quote was, "If I talk to you about my work and the changes that we've made in education in this country, then I must tell you about my mother and my father and the wonderful home in which I grew up." When I read that, I knew that the story was not with what the Hill sisters had done, but where they had come from. So, oh, I gotta change my slide. Look at them. So I did not have a photo of Mrs. Hill until I gave this talk. And thankfully, our friends at the Filson Historical sent over Heather. I see Heather and Jim are both on there. Sent over this photo that came from the Patti Smith Hill archives. But on the left is their father, and in the middle there, it's titled Mother, it says Mother. So in the early years of the 19th century, we have two Kentuckians come up. William Wallace Hill In most places, he's talked about as being W.W. Hill. William Wallace Hill was born in Bath County, Kentucky, and began living on his own about age 14. He educated himself, he was self-taught, and he eventually made it to Center College in Danville. And then he went on to Princeton's Presbytery Seminary in New Jersey, and he settled in Louisville about 1840. Reverend Hill starts preaching in Presbyterian churches, and by 1853, he was the editor of a very popular publication known as the Presbyterian Herald. He was seen as a positive influence on the church. He was known to have keen intelligence, intense sensitivity, and unwavering determination. He was what we would call an empath. He also served as a freelance pastor. He would go around and give sermons in other places. And it was on a trip to Danville where a local woman heard his sermon. And as she listened to him preach, she said to her friend sitting next to her, "Now there is the one man that I could marry." So Martha Jane Smith was born in Danville, Kentucky, but she was orphaned early. And she and her brother went to live with an aunt and uncle. She also possessed a keen mind, but she had a very vivid imagination and loved music. Because her new family was close with the Center College president at the time, her brother enrolled in classes, and she was lucky enough to receive tutoring in all the same classes that the boys took. She took every course that all the boys took at Center, but because she was female, she was not allowed to matriculate and earn her degree. Literature was her favorite course of study. Creative writing was her finest academic skill. She received a letter from a man named George Prentice, who was the editor of the Louisville Journal at the time, in which he wrote, quote, "You are a fine poetical genius, and I hope that you will write frequently for my columns." But writing, of course, was not her only skill. She was known to have the sweetest voice, and she earned the nickname in the newspapers as the Jenny Lind of Kentucky. So, of course, William and Martha were soon married, and they settled in Louisville. Reverend Hill continues to write for the Herald, which was the family's main source of income. Soon the family buys a plot of land in Anchorage, Kentucky, just in time to build a home before the arrival of their daughter Mildred Hill in 1859. Now this land is on the site of the Anchorage Presbyterian Church. I would say just down from one of my favorite restaurants, Selena's Willow Lake Tavern. It's just on the riverside of Anchorage out there. This land, when they went out there, was described as, quote, "So untouched by man, it seemed prehistoric. The brush was so thick that even the horses could not break through the foliage." I just love thinking about that. And, you know, so in the 1860s, there were still places in our community that were just untouched by settlers at the time. But war was looming on the horizon, and the publication, the Herald, stopped because of the unreliability of the mail in the post office. Soon Reverend Hill realized that he had to provide a stable income for his family, and so he added rooms onto his house in order to take pupils in for private instruction. He was going to be a private tutor, and with no thoughts is to even making it a permanent thing. What Reverend Hill had just done was build the Bellwood Female Seminary. I'm going to check in to see if there are any questions. Oh no. I'm navigating lots of screens. I think we're good. Okay, we're doing good. So this is the part, people don't like it when I fast forward to the end of the Civil War, but I'm one of those people, I just skip over it. I just get to the end. Let's say at the end of the Civil War, which is a good picture here, In June of 1865, Sherman's armies were disbanded is not the right word. Louisville was going to be the center of the American armies of the West. So Sherman's armies came to Louisville, the Union encampment here, while they were awaiting their orders to go home. But they weren't alone in Louisville. Not only do we have the citizens of the city, which was one of the 10th largest city in the United States, but the Confederate soldiers were also here in Louisville arranging transportation south, which means that what happened in that summer was that our city's population doubled. 97,000 troops and almost 9,000 animals came that month. Over 70,000 of them came by steamboat. So imagine, here it is June in the summer. Can you imagine if our population just doubled over the course of a couple weeks? It was a hustle and bustle kind of place. The soldiers, by the way, had also just received their pay. So they were ready for a little freedom. They were in a city that was mixed between free people of color, civilians, and bourbon, a whole lot of booze. We cannot deny the cultural aspect of the bourbon and the vice that existed in the city. So even though the city very much appreciated the economic boon that these federal paychecks brought, Union soldiers were not necessarily, they were not on their best behavior. They have reports of their looting, robbing, raping. They actually committed murder in some cases. And it was so bad for the city's population of people of color that Union General John Logan called for an official call for the end of the harassment of Blacks in Louisville. In turn, many citizens of Louisville began to form judgments about the Union soldiers, and many freely embraced the Confederate veterans, many of whom were very destitute or former POWs. And of course, you all know how it is in Kentucky and in Louisville. We have family everywhere, right? So there were a lot of familial ties to the city on both sides, Union and Confederate. But what we see is a rise of ex-Confederate officers who become prominent, successful, and well-respected figures in the Louisville community. Let's talk about them. These photos here, one officer on the left with the great mustache, his name was Bennett Young. Bennett Young returned to Louisville after the war. He was one of Morgan's raiders. He returned to Louisville after the war and married the daughter of Reverend Stuart Robinson, who's seen on the right. Robinson and Young begin to use their wealth and their influence for benevolent endeavors, namely the Bellwood Female Seminary. Bellwood had become really the it place for Louisville's elite daughters. These elite girls were sent to Bellwood to be sheltered from the urban city that was sick of war and full of pestilence. And this institution becomes so well known and so well respected, the graduates of Bellwood School were automatically accepted into places like Wellesley and Vassar without ever having to take entrance exams. The standards of academics were high there. So the rest of the Hill children, Mildred was just about to be born when they got the land, and the rest of the Hill children were born there at Bellwood, including Patty, who came along in 1868. I love this. This sketch by Edwin Finch was printed in the New Albany newspaper, and you'll have to forgive me on the name of which one it was at the time. But I love it because you can see the tower in on the left there, and the tower was a center for the children. So this is a quote from Reverend William Wallace Hill. Our little circle soon grew to be 30. The school Bellwood came upon its founder in the light of an unexpected experience, quaintly styled as the child of Providence, who've grown up as the result of war, without any thought that it would be anything but temporary. But I believe every man should educate his daughter that if in the rapid revolutions which are now taking place, if she should be left without any resources, then she will be able to take care of herself and her family. A thoroughly educated, practical woman need neither starve, beg, nor lose her rank in society just because she loses her property. So the Hill family philosophy at Bellwood was that experience and study would bring forth the best potential in each child so that they would assume places of responsibility and leadership within their own community. Now, this is a remarkably modern ideal. Reverend Hill was progressive as an educator anyway. He also taught geology and astronomy when many of his peers were teaching creationism. He thought really that girls should not have to marry in order to be successful, that they should all have a profession. Mrs. Hill thought that children should have whatever reasonable pleasure they desired. And she would, rather than express judgment of doing something wrong, she would use an example to amplify the meaning of what is right. She laughed and she played with them. She tried to make all tasks as pleasant as possible. They had the tower on the Bellwood, which was a playroom for the children. They did not have surveillance. It was independent social time. And there was a red flag put out on the tower when it was time to come in. So there were these signals for children to be responsible for their own action. And punishment, which could be very harsh in that time, and generally a blanket kind of punishment for everyone that did anything wrong, they implemented punishment on a case-by-case basis that was dependent on the infraction. So this is a time when children were to be seen and not heard. Individualism, especially with children, was kind of taboo. Everybody followed the same rules. Everybody was to obey. And a proverb, a Bible verse that they used in child rearing was Proverbs 22:6. Train up the child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. For all the mothers on the call today and fathers on the call today, I'm sure you know that children just don't hear it once and then do it. So this was the standard. And for the Hills, they were really stepping outside of the box when it came to the way that they regarded children. They run Bellwood for a while. Eventually, it is no longer a challenge for Reverend Hill, and he wants to push himself a little bit farther. So he takes a position in Fulton, Missouri, right outside of St. Louis. And they were there not for very long, a few years, and Reverend Hill gets sick and passes away. He was buried there. But couple the loss of him with the economic panic of the 1870s, and the Hill family lost everything at the time. Mrs. Hill decides to take the children and move back to Louisville. And on the train ride back, Patty, and I think Jesse too, but I know Patty, not only gets typhoid fever, but also spinal meningitis. Can you imagine how difficult it might be to have one of those afflictions in the 1870s, much less two? So they get back to town. She is very sickly, and they move in with a family friend whose name is Dr. Lunsford Yandell, father of the future sculptress Enid Yandell. And Dr. Lunsford Yandell really saves Patty's life. They take in Martha and all the children into their home until they can get back on their feet and well again. And to the point where Patty and Jesse start attending public school in Louisville. I should mention that Bellwood hired a new principal to take Reverend Hill's place when he left, and they hired the brother of their great benefactor, Bennett Young. His brother was Reverend Daniel Young, who oversaw Bellwood for just 1 week before he died. So the replacement of Reverend Hill was there for 1 week and he passed away. And so they were left with his replacement, who was his wife, Rebecca. Rebecca Young remained the principal of the Bellwood Seminary until she left her position in 1883. I always say when she was promoted to become the wife of William S. Culbertson of New Albany, who was at that time the wealthiest man in the state of Indiana. So Bennett Young and William Culbertson were building a bridge together, a little thing called the K&I, maybe you've heard of it. And Young thought that Culbertson and his sister were well suited. They both were very involved in their Presbyterian faith. They both had similar outlooks on education. And most importantly, they shared a common desire to really help people, and they were community oriented to bring in change in their communities. So the two would go on to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in social betterment causes, which she continued long after the death of William Culbertson. Rebecca Culbertson used the wealth of her late husband to fund music schools. The photograph on the left there is Miss Packard's Music School, which was located in the Culbertson Mansion for 5 years. She also funded orphanages, tenement housing for Black women. On the right there, the Plymouth Social Settlement House is one of them. Also schools and Presbyterian seminaries, including the last bequest before she died, the very last of the Culbertson money used to invest in a good cause was to save the Presbyterian Seminary located at First and Broadway. It was slated for demolition, and you all might know this building as the downtown campus of the Jefferson Community and Technical College. I know this building as the place where I began my college education and the place where I heard my own calling to do local history. So now by the 1870s, Louisville is an inner city. Social services are lacking for those without the comforts of cash. And working conditions are really poor. They're terrible, especially for women and girls, many of whom were working every day as young as age 10. The children of the women working in these factories were often underfed, completely unsupervised, and of course, because women were paid far less than men. Also, Kentucky never officially seceded from the Union, so they didn't adopt a new constitution after the war ended. So women still had less rights in the old constitution. And so here we start to see the rise of suffrage ideals and real activity in Kentucky. So when the men go off to war, women move off the shelf and into action. With over half of the men in the United States either killed or maimed in some way, unable to work, women were forced to start doing, and they began to organize. They become reformers in suffrage, but they also become reformers in labor laws, sanitary, environmental laws, and settlement housing. One such settlement house was known as the Holcomb Mission. The Holcomb Mission in 1884 was a social betterment facility dedicated to keeping these poor children off the street. They advertised that they would take all kids under age 18. There were so many children that came between the ages of 3 and 5 that they literally didn't know what to do with them. So prominent women on the board of the Holcomb Mission, I'm going to pause there because you're looking at pictures of the Union Gospel Mission. These photographs are of the Holcomb Mission became the Union Gospel Mission. And I believe the one on the right with the children standing in front was about the 40s or 50s. So it lasted quite a long time. Don't quote me on the date on that one. But the pictures you see, the Union Gospel Mission, are what the Holcomb Mission turned into. So women on the board of the Holcomb Mission, who included Louise Yandel, mother of Enid, and the wife of the doctor that saved Patty's life. Oh, I see I have a question. I'm really glad that you asked me this. Bellwood in LaGrange from Carolyn. Yes, it is the same Bellwood. However, it is not the same building. The original Bellwood was built there, and I believe the new Bellwood is now across the street. It began as the same institution, but is not the same building since then. Thank you. I'm so sorry. What building is on the grounds of dear old Bellwood now? It's part of the Presbyterian. Oh, Elizabeth, if you're on there, you'll have to help me on that. I think it's part of the campus of the Anchorage Presbyterian Church.
That's correct.
That's correct. Thank you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Reitmeyer, president of Happy Birthday Park, joining us. Thank you, Caitlin, for letting me know we had the questions. Okay, so women are on the board of the Whole Commission, prominent local citizens, including Louise Yandel. They organized something called the Louisville Kindergarten Training School in an effort to train local women on how to teach all these children that they got. The instructor of this teacher's training school was a woman named Miss Anna Bryan. To pay Anna Bryan's first year's salary, a member of the board of the Whole Commission offered to sell her brand new fur coat in order to come up with the cash for her salary. The first class was 6 girls total. Patty was the youngest of these girls. And she did so well in her training that immediately upon graduation, they placed her in one of the 2 kindergartens open. I counted this the other day. I've seen this picture 1,000 times. There are about 30 kids in there. So in August of 1887, that's where we are now, kindergarten was seen as kind of like a cult. They called it the, quote, Louisville experiment. And it had been tried before by a local German immigrant, but when he left the city, kindergarten left with him. We also see smaller kindergartens. For example, there was an early kindergarten at the Utopian Society in New Harmony in Indiana. I'm pretty sure I saw John Hale on the call. His ancestress was one of the people that started kindergarten in Indiana. So we see these little pop-ups of kindergartens around, but they're mostly influenced by individuals and not a full-grown movement. So these new kindergartens were described as, quote, this was a Louisville newspaper article in August of 1887. The method of kindergarten is precisely that of a woman pleased with a pig-headed husband. The children are not to know they're being instructed. So children, kindergarten and philanthropy are kind of coming up at the same time. Child is now becoming a symbol of hope. So within 3 years, Louisville had 10 kindergartens, including one for children of color. And Louisville suddenly gets national attention because this was missionary work. It was missionary work based on the highest moral, benevolent ideals for social betterment. And the method was new, of course, so it never got funded. If it weren't for the wives of influential families in Louisville, the kindergarten movement in the United States could have ended right there. Early supporters of the movement, and not just activists, but with dollars, included Mrs. Castleman, Yandel, Carter, Belknap, Bullitt, Speed, Brandeis, Flexner, Stewart, Hayburn, Swope, and the Filson Club. I see Jim and Heather are on there too. So by the World's Fair of 1893 in Chicago, kindergarten gets its own exhibit. Patty and her sister Mildred spent their summer demonstrating the ideals of the kindergarten classroom at the World's Fair. So the photo on the slide is the photo of the women's building. Its construction and management of the women's building was headed up by a Louisvillian Her name was Bertha Palmer, although everyone called her Sissy. So Louisville Sissy Palmer headed up the management of the women's building. And surrounding the building and the close-up on the right side are caryatids, or statues. And these were sculpted by Enid Yandel, who was a world-renowned sculptress. Since the Yandels and the Hills were very close, Enid and the Hill sisters, they truly grew up together at some points in the same household. The face of these statues in particular was the face of Mildred Hill. And Mildred and youngest sister Jessie often posed as models for Enid's work. And when her family had a family reunion last summer, we went through a lot of photographs of her work and tried to compare them to different photographs of different Hill sisters. It was pretty fun. So one of the men that saw the Hill Sisters kindergarten exhibit was a New York businessman who published education materials. His name, oh, there's Enid, sorry, I skipped that slide. So you see a demonstration of kindergarten on the right side here. One of the men that saw this exhibit was a businessman by the name of Milton Bradley. Maybe you've heard of him. Milton's particular interest in this experiment brought validity to their new style of teaching. With his word of mouth and his financial support, word of the new kindergarten had officially hit the street. This is what we would call going viral. So in the same year, the sisters published a book called, and you see it on the left here, Song Stories for the Kindergarten, which included their morning circle song, Good Morning to All. And that song, they say, changed a little bit when Patty sang it at a birthday party at the Little Loom House, what we would know as the Little Loom House, for Lizette Hast. And Lizette was the daughter of Mildred's music teacher, Professor Lewis Hast. And that little ditty became what we know as Happy Birthday to You. Just gonna check on the questions real quick. Just gonna check on the questions. I don't see any. Looks good. Patty, this is a photograph of Patty Smith Hill about 1905. So Patty goes on to travel the nation. She's learning and spreading her knowledge, leading a movement really for general child welfare, for socialization and for play. Little things like the water fountains, the tissue boxes, individual coat hooks, school nurses. This is all part of Patty's campaign for kindergarten. And because of a series of debates at Columbia University in New York, she earns an honorary doctorate and becomes a professor of Columbia Teachers College well into the 20th century. She worked closely with her mentor, John Dewey, and others considered to be the fathers of child psychology and the playground movement. She created Columbia's Institute of Child Welfare Research, and she developed the memorable Patty Hill blocks. These blocks, you might remember, were very large, and they required collaboration among children in order to build something together. Patty Smith Hill is credited for Americanizing and modernizing the Louisville experiment. And she is the foremost leader in early childhood education. Her work laid the foundations for the standards of kindergarten education adopted into the public school system in the United States. And she has personally, very literally impacted the lives of millions of Americans. So while Patty is chasing her love of education, Sister Mildred invests her time into the Louisville music community. She becomes a music teacher at Semple's Collegiate School, and she eventually starts to write about her musical interests. In J. Stoddard Johnston's 1896 text, The Memorial History of Louisville, Mildred was invited to write the chapter on the city's music history. But in her private time, Mildred had a habit of sitting on the streets of Louisville, of the city, trying to capture what they were known then as the Negro street cries. These are short, quick, merchant melodies, like a jingle, that were designed to be so simple that a child could hear it once and then easily repeat it. So a very popular, well-known one would be shave and a haircut, 2 bits. You could hear it once, pass it by, and it gets stuck in your head all day. These melodies enthralled Mildred, and she would sit on the streets downtown with a notebook and a pencil. And I've seen this notebook, it's really incredible. And she even mentioned how difficult it was to capture the notes in between, what we would know as blue notes. So in her writing, Mildred predicted correctly that a new, unique type of American music would form from this Negro sound. So music scholar Dr. Michael Beckerman of NYU, he believes that an 1892 Journal of Music article on this African-American sound was written by Mildred Hill under a pen name called Johann Tonser. She not only writes as a man, and I believe, Jim, if you're still on the call, I believe you helped Dr. Beckerman figure out that she was using a pen name because they could not find any man named Johann Tonser ever existing in Louisville. Not only does she write as a man, but she writes as a German man in order for her to be taken seriously as a music scholar. Now, this article that they believe she wrote not only describes the power and the usefulness of Black music for all other musicians, but it also points to a unique feature of this music's ability to call forth imagery of the past, constructing a distinctly American music born from the Negro sound. Now, this is the 1890s, before jug bands. Here's Mildred predicting the birth of jazz, blues, rock and roll, hip hop, all of it before jug bands have even begun. Now, this article was sent to European composer Anton Dvorak, who is, of course, inspired by these melodies, and Beckerman believes that he used them to create his renowned New World Symphony, one of music's most popular symphonies. Even Neil Armstrong took a copy of the New World Symphony to the moon landing in 1969. I always think like Mildred made it to the moon. Beckerman believes that Mildred's most famous composition, Happy Birthday to You, was compiled in reference to these Negro street cries that she collected. And indeed, it does, the song's power is related to its aesthetic and its dynamic of a street cry. The melody is so simple that a child could hear it once and easily repeat it. So with Mildred's music and Patty's travels, the song goes with them. Japan was an early adopter of this kindergarten style. And you can see as they travel, spreading the ideals of education, it's not the only thing that took root. Happy Birthday to You is a byproduct of their educational style. It's a result of their mother's influence. And it's an expression of a new idea of a person's individuality. It was perfect for the right time. I hear there's a question. I am so glad that you asked this question. Did Patty and Mildred interact with Enid at all? Absolutely, they were friends. Where is Mildred's notebook held? So a few years ago, you might have heard about Happy Birthday to You being in under copyright, and you couldn't use it in movies or anything because it was so expensive for people to pay the royalties to Warner Brothers. So there's been a lot of work on the copyright, and a lot of it came out of the finding of Mildred's notebook and Mildred's things. Let me back up a little bit. Mildred's assets, she died before Patty, very young. Mildred was very close to her fellow music student, Hattie Bishop. Hattie Bishop Speed is who we would know her as, founder of the Speed Museum. Hattie Bishop and Mildred Hill had the same music teacher. So they were also very close friends. So Mildred's things were with Hattie. And when Hattie passed away, her things went to the archives of the music school at U of L. You could go today to the archives of the music school at the University of Louisville and see this notebook for yourself. I believe James Purcell is still there. That is why happy birthday is never on a jukebox. You're right about that. What are some other popular street cries or kindergarten songs? Do we know any of them? Specific ones, you know, that's where I call on my colleague Michael Jones to pull them up. I always think of "Get your cold beer here," you know, things at the baseball field, little things that they just rattle off. Michael Jones, who also serves on the board of Happy Birthday Park, he's written a lot about early African American music, especially in Kentucky. He has a small collection of some Negro street cries, and we've even given this talk together where he would play some. So I'm afraid I can't answer that directly right now. I don't really know of any melodies off the top of my head. I always think of shaving a haircut and cold beer. So if there's no other questions, I'm gonna move forward here. Now these two, just make sure sorry, give me just a moment. Thank you, Heather. Now let's remember that this is a family philosophy, and there were more than just two Hill children. So we have Archie, one of their brothers. He founded a little place called Neighborhood House. Maybe you've heard it, still in existence, with Jane Addams of Chicago. These are social settlement initiatives. He worked with Frances Ingram, who is the head resident, and she formed the league that is now what we would know as the Metro United Way. They work with immigrants, citizenship classes, legal aid. The Neighborhood House is still running in Portland. That's a little, the original Neighborhood House on the right. On the left is the Mary D. Hill School. Mary Hill, their sister, was a teacher and a supervisor of public schools, and she wrote lessons and curriculum on the national scale. In 1917, Central High School, Ninth and Magazine, was renamed to be the Mary D. Hill School, and it was later renamed the Hill Adult Learning Laboratory. So you can see that Louisville, along with the Flexner family, who helped standardize medical and nursing curriculum and education, the Hill family is working to standardize public education. We see the Hill family's careers marked by respect for the individual and love for every child. The Hill family is very well known and deeply respected within the community. And Martha grows up to see all of her children with careers of honor through their philosophy that experience and study would bring forth the best potential in each child so that they may assume places of leadership and responsibility within their community. There was even a joke told. What do Rome and Louisville have in common? The 7 hills. Oh yeah. I'll end the part by saying that I hope you've been able to see that it's not just what the girls did, it's that the girls were a product of trying to make their community a better place by focusing on the small things they could do, like helping poor children, children of color, immigrant children, in a way that showed that we care for them, that we care, and that they can teach us as much as we can teach them, that you can truly change the entire world. And this little ditty that goes along with it is a reminder that Louisville is a powerful place, and that when we see these dynamic cultural shifts, they're perfectly right for someone to come out of where we are and what we do to go on and make global change. I always like to end this talk with a quote from Patty. On her graduation day from that Louisville kindergarten training school, she spoke about her guiding philosophy, and her philosophy is the same philosophy that we adopt to build the Happy Birthday Park. The world moves forward on the feet of little children, and that play is universal. We find all the descendants of Adam, every tribe and every nation under the shining sun, gathering together and playing. Nor is this instinct confined to man. Look at the young of all animals. What do they do in the greater part of their early life? They are playing, playing, playing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. If there's any further questions, you can leave them in the chat. Any questions?
They're not allowed to talk to me?
It messes up with the recording.
Oh, that's right. There's too much
sound on the recording with too many different things.
So Elizabeth did say, thank you, Elizabeth, that Smithsonian Folkways has a collection of African American street cries. Mend your vendor jingles, selling strawberries, rags for sale, knife sharpening. And Happy Birthday is now in the public domain. It can absolutely go on a jukebox.
It's time to update the jukeboxes and also to bring jukeboxes back into, we have a quick question. So this recording will not be publicly available on Locust Grove's YouTube page. In order to receive a copy of the recording, you'll need to be part of the Locust Grove email list. I just put the link in the chat to be part of that mailing list. You get an email from me once a week. I promise it's not painful. But also, if you don't want to join the email list, if that doesn't work for you, you can send me an email at marketing@locustgrove.org and we'll work something out.
Carolyn asked, with all my connections to Indiana, where do you reside? Well, I am a citizen of Louisville, Kentucky. I work in Frankfort, Kentucky. I was raised in Northern Indiana, and I've spent the last 8 years before coming here to the Kentucky Historical Society working in the Indiana side of the river. I always say, and my friend Ronnie Drysdale is here from the Kentucky Derby Museum, I always say we really try to bridge that gap and make a lot of connections between Indiana and Kentucky. Not only do we have a lot of the shared history, I know that Filson has programs about our shared history, but it's very difficult to separate the two. There are a lot of connections between each side of the river, and we try to shorten that river to less than a mile and 100 years apart. So thank you for asking that question. Oh, Mary Rose says, I taught at the Mary D. Hill School on East Kentucky Street. I taught adult education there, and now it's part of the Simmons College campus. That's great. And for anyone that has information about any of these things, please make sure to give us a call. Received revenues from Happy Birthday before it became part of the public domain. Warner Brothers owned the rights to it, and there were many different places that received funds for it. Elizabeth, can you unmute and make sure to tell them about Happy Birthday Park and how they can get involved?
Yes, I just posted a comment. If anybody here wants to help us after we have a vaccine, we will be starting our events up later on probably next spring. And we play with children in the style of Patty Hill under a big tent and tell their parents about the Hill sisters and their wonderful contributions. So if you want to help us with that task or that fun event, those fun events, we would love to have you. In addition, we have several committees of the board that are working right now to, get ready to raise the funds to build the park. It's going to be a public park. It will have a pavilion so that we can have birthday parties under it, but there will also be a playing field where families can gather around picnic tables and play in the shade. So that you'll probably hear that. We hoped that we would tell you where that was going to be in June, but we had, things have come up, so we haven't been able to follow our timeline exactly. But as soon as we can have the design ready for you to see, we'll be posting that on our website. So I'm going to type my email address right in here, and you can just email me if you want to get involved.
Maria answered that Music Together Worldwide was someone that received royalties from the song as well.
Yes. Patty's family had, well, Archie had the royalties for a long time, and when he died, Patty and Jessica received the royalties, and in fact went to court to protect those royalties because Time Warner was trying to take them away. And then when Patty died, Time Warner did, or maybe when Jessica died, Time Warner had the gained the rights because they had bought the publisher that had published Good Morning to All. And
it's so funny to hear the story of, I love the story about Roosevelt's birthday. And when they sang Happy Birthday to President Roosevelt, and Patty was blown away that everybody knew it.
That anybody knew it.
That
right?
anyone knew it. She had no idea that it had gotten that far.
Yes. So Time Warner was keeping strict, what do you call that? Intellectual rights or performance copyrights of the song until a nice woman who wanted to make a documentary movie about it. Jennifer, forgotten her last name, maybe you know her
last name too.
And she sued Time Warner for the rights to use the song in the documentary movie, and she won, and it's now in the public domain.
Does anybody else have any questions for us? Doesn't it make you feel powerful, like you can change the world?
Yeah, I'm about to go write a song that's going to change the world too. That's
and Brian, I wish I could have enjoyed you for your julep cocktail and celebration of all this, but I just can't tell you how much it warms my heart to see so many faces. I have friends and family and colleagues, and y'all, even my moms are here.
Oh.
Well, that's so great.
I know. Thanks for having me, Locust Grove.
Oh, Jessica, it's been such a pleasure to have you and all of our friends and what wonderful faces from around the region. It's so great. Excuse me, Elizabeth just put her email in the chat if you're interested in being part of Happy Birthday Park. We've also posted the website, happybirthdayparklou.com, so you can get in touch there. Jessica, of course, works at the Kentucky Historical Society these days, so they have a robust website. Locust Grove has a robust website, and we are moving towards, I think KHS has reopened with limited capacity, and Locust Grove will be reopening in the coming weeks. We're very excited to see all of you in person. A quick commercial, we do have another lecture this Friday. This Friday, Richard Bell will be speaking to us on Hamilton Remixed in honor of Hamilton, the musical, coming to Disney Plus on Saturday, the 4th of July. We've got a little preview for you. There's a lecture that's coming up on Friday. You can buy tickets to that on our website or email me and I'll get you set up. They start at $8, but we're so excited we started off today celebrating some wonderful teachers and birthdays, and now we're going to celebrate America's birthday on Friday, and we're so excited for all the teachers who joined us today, because whether you're Jessica with her great historical mind or one of our wonderful volunteers at Locust, teachers in such a way, and we're so pleased that you all are with us today. With that, I'm going to say toodaloo, and until next time, stay tuned for our next Living Room lecture at the end of July, and bye!